Welcome to Very Honored Frater BT's Esoterinerd Podcast, Episode 15, Silence, in which we interview Silence the Aquarian. But first, today's episode, and indeed everything you see around you, is brought to you in part by M.E.S.T. 1. A coined word, meaning matter, energy, space, and time. The physical universe. All physical phenomena may be considered as energy operating in space and time. The movement of matter or energy in time is the measure of space. All things are M.E.S.T, except theta. 2. The symbol for the physical universe in use hereafter is M.E.S.T, from the first letters of the words matter, energy, space, and time, or the Greek letter phi. 3. Simply a composite of energies and particles and spaces which are agreed upon and which are looked at. 4. A solid object, and the space and energy and so forth which comprise such solid objects. 5. Any or all arrangements of energy, of whatever kind, whether in fluid or object form, in space or spaces. If you would like to follow along at home with the tech support segment of the Esoterinerd podcast, just go to Google and punch in the letters TECHDICT.PDF. All the knowledge, none of the bullshit. But I do recommend staying away from the actual organization. Tonight's interview is with Silence the Aquarian. This is someone who I came into contact with on Facebook by way of mutual friends, in the Source family primarily. And it turns out we have quite a few things in common. Among them is we live within about a half-mile radius of one another. So this interview actually took place in person. It's a long interview, so without further ado, let's get to that interview, shall we? Greetings, brother!
Greetings, brother.
Silence the Aquarian.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Welcome to the Esoterinerd podcast. So it's a trip. Okay, so basically there was somehow through the ethers, through the wires, through the Facebook, I got the word out. I said, hey, world, I'm Pymander the Aquarian. Jen gave me the name. And then an echo came back from how many blocks away?
Just over Obama Mountain.
Okay, so like right over there?
About
like
5 minutes away. Right
so
over
like a half a mile?
Occidental.
Saying, I'm Silence the Aquarian. Jen gave me my name too. So we're second generation Aquarians through Jen's shenanigans. And so we're brothers in that. What a thing to be brothers in. So Jen, if you're listening to this, I think it'd be cool if maybe you and the two of us did an episode together.
That would be rad.
I think that'd be great.
The synchronicities that brought all of us together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I'm part of the family, but I also feel like a special connection to Jen because, you know, he gave me my name, you know, and so it's interesting to meet someone with that exact same scenario. So tell me a little bit about how that came about and how if he said anything about it when he gave it to you, or if you have any.
Well, my experiences with meeting this Source family, go back to right before my first son was born. I just moved to Los Feliz, and I was kind of at the beginning of a set of experiences that I didn't even really know how to put into words. My now wife and I were playing in a band at the time. We went up to play at the Burning Man Decompression Street Fair in San Francisco, and I'd been reading Carl Jung's On Synchronicities. Mm-hmm. I'm a psychologist. That's what I do. I study psychology and theology at Fuller.
Oh, nice.
Interestingly, as I was reading this book, so many things within the book began to manifest physically in my life, and that was something I didn't really have a category for. And frankly, I was a little bit embarrassed to even talk to anybody about it because I felt like I was kind of stepping out into the deep end.
Yeah.
And having grown up in a fundamentalist Pentecostal church where people were very, very extremely emotional and what I perceive as overly mystical in retrospect. I was kind of almost in reaction mode against things that were that experiential.
Yeah.
And so I began having these experiential things happening all of a sudden again, and I didn't really have a whole lot of categories for it. One of them, our band was playing at the Christian Street Fair. We ended up staying, because of another set of synchronicities, in the mansion where the Merry Pranksters used to party.
I'm not familiar with this.
It's the old Russian embassy. Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters, they're basically the set of people that introduced LSD.
Oh.
He was the Timothy Leary of the West Coast.
Oh, okay.
Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. And in terms of West Coast bohemian history, I mean, they had a significant role. I tend to read books and sets, and while I was up there, I was like, oh, this is interesting history. The Grateful Dead and Ken Kesey, the Merry Pranksters, used to do acid here.
Mm-hmm.
I found myself with my wife and my bandmates, going up the staircase. The guy who lived there was showing us around the house. He's showing us where Anton LaVey used to live. He used to live there. Still claw marks on the door frame from the Panther that he kept hidden in the room. So there we are, smoking out in a room wallpapered with original Fillmore posters. And so I've got to read The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. So I pick up that book, and lo and behold, they had been reading Carl Jung's On Synchronicities.
Huh.
And so there's all these layers of synchronicities that started kind of emerging from that I still didn't know what to do with. It was around the time I'd had a somewhat profound mushroom experience with a group of friends that I attended camp with at Burning Man, in a house in Echo Park overlooking the Griffith Observatory. Also, shortly before I found out I was going to become a father, my wife and I decided to get a place together in Los Feliz, and it was during a time where synchronicities were speeding up. People were just walking into our lives, and we ended up having this kind of cool communal existence. The kind of thing I'd always kind of wanted, and it was really happening. Is I felt like I was becoming this other person. There's this saying, the child is the father of the man. I know Brian Wilson has a song called Child is the Father of the Man, and actually Father Yod had used the same quote a few times. And I felt like in the process of having created a life, I was becoming this greater version of myself. I was leaving this cocoon behind, and something was emerging, and this fantastic community was emerging there in Los Feliz. Well, I walked down to Wacko's, my favorite Bizarro Emporium bookstore and art gallery, where all the great pop surrealism from LA gets started. And I met Phil. Phil was working there at the time. He played in a fantastic band that was touring with Montreal for a while. We just had this instant soul connection. And a lot of people I met during that time, it was just like we locked eyes, and it's like we knew each other.
Mm-hmm.
And Phil was one of those people. And you're kind of one of those people, Ed. You are one of those people. And so Phil and I were bonding. He pulled out the book of the Source Family and says, you need to read this. So I take it home, and I'm walking down the sidewalk. I walk about 5 blocks back to my apartment right behind Fred 62. I'm walking down the sidewalk, and there's Phil. He's standing in front of me. And I'm trying to figure this out. And the only thing I could think of was, having grown up in a Pentecostal church, we always heard the story of Philip, one of the early church fathers.
The one who got skinned, right? Or no.
I'm not sure what happened
Philip,
to Philip.
was he Nathaniel? Nathaniel was Bartholomew. Philip was the guy...
Was he one of the 12, or was he like after the 12?
Oh, that's a good question.
But anyway, there's a story in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, where God picks him up and transports him in the spirit, and he reappears somewhere else.
I think he's the one who got skinned in Armenia.
Oh, well,
No, that was Bartholomew.
I hope that doesn't happen to Phil.
Philip.
Okay, to our Phil. We don't want him to get skinned.
Well, anyway, no.
There are a lot of Armenians in East Hollywood, so Phil, be careful.
Yeah, no, there's the feast day of Saint Nathaniel. The Armenian Orthodox feel really guilty and light candles and get really thoughtful about how their ancestors skinned him alive. And on the Sistine Chapel, he's the one that's holding a skin suit of himself. They don't show him as like Muscle Man, because that would have been gross back then. If it was now, of course, then
That's starting to sound like a South Park episode.
I know, right?
So anyway,
South Park.
There's Phil, just like the Apostle Phil, materializing in front of me. And I'd had such a set of bizarre synchronous experiences. I'm just like, okay, why not? Is this what you got for me? Universe, God, whatever, let's do this. And Phil looked at me, and we looked at each other and said, well, I guess we weren't finished talking. Here, come back to my place.
Huh.
And as it turns out, he didn't materialize in thin air. Shortly after he sold me the book, his boss said, hey, can you take this package of things to the post office, which is right across the street? So he drives the back way, parks his car, goes to the post office, and so by the time I walk in there...
Right. So there was an explanation.
But still, it was a phenomenal synchronicity.
Yeah.
Because just that happened.
Yeah.
And so we walked back to my house, and at the time, I kind of lay low with a lot of substances these days, being a father.
Right.
You know, and that period's almost over. Say almost. But it was in the tradition of let's smoke a bowl together, and I never was a daily smoker, and it was always a sacramental thing when I did smoke. So it was a sacramental thing. We smoked and we shared. And come to find out while we were talking, I'm looking at this book, and I'm like, you know, it's interesting. I heard that the Source family had a restaurant out on Sweetser on Sunset, and I just drove out there yesterday. He's like, I was out there yesterday. And we just both realized something had called us out there at the same time. We didn't see each other, but we were out there at the same time. And then here we were talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to figure out what it meant, but in a way not. Just kind of letting these things happen.
Letting it be, yeah. Like, okay, is it a ghost? Is it a past life?
Right.
Is it a...
And I started getting this feeling that I was part of the Source family. And
right.
I'm asking people, okay, is there somebody that died on January 12th, 1972? Because I feel like I was there.
Sometimes, I mean, the Dalai Lama spent, it was the Karmapa who spent, like, was it 8 years? Or 4 years? Oh, I forget. It's interesting to look at, like, the documented, how long people spend in the Bardo. When they document it, it's like 3 to 8 years sometimes. So, I mean, that's interesting.
And if I remember correctly, you had a similar thought when you were talking to the Aquarians at that one interview.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't like to blurt it out usually, but when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, fuck, that was me, you know, because, like, I mean, it must be, you know, I mean, I was, like, pretty convinced, actually. So, I mean, I was pretty, like, well-driven to, like, seek these people out and, like, start, you know, doing a lot of yoga so that I could be the old man sitting in lotus position who's able to actually, because what I was at the time that I became aware of the Source family was I was deeply saturated and deeply entrenched in the Western system, particularly Golden Dawn, and locked into this weird political fucking bullshit struggle thing that was just draining my life out. And so I was in the worst of the West. And I had kind of left my Eastern practice behind many, many, many years earlier. And so then I saw the Source family. I'm like, that was my original idea. You know, when my mom died, and I was still into the raising the Tantra and all this stuff, and combining
tantric rituals.
Yeah.
Right.
Combining it with West and Western and Wiccan, you know, even.
I think your original question was how I got the name.
Yeah.
And this is my kind of convoluted tale of how it came about.
Yeah.
So Phil and I are trying to sort this out. And where did I meet Jen? I honestly can't remember. But somehow I ended up looking him up. Oh no! I found out he was going to be playing at the new Los Angeles Folk Festival at the Zorthian Ranch. Oh. Another amazing cult.
I love that. Yeah.
Occult location from old Los Angeles.
I used to hang out there. The people who lived there used to do their laundry here back in the 90s when the temple was like brand new.
Wow. So there's a connection between Zorthian and this house.
And this house, yeah.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Everybody was like doing a figure eight between this house and Zorthian's ranch and between the end of 97 and August of 98. It was the same people over there that were over here. And a lot of them didn't know who the hell I was. They didn't know it was my house. You know, and then there were rumors about what was going on up here. This was like all black and white tile. This was black curtains, black ceiling, all the furniture. It was like that. That's my own spin on it in there. The traditional Golden Dawn temple has a particular look that you can kind of see, you can recognize in that if you're familiar with it. But it's different from that. You know, it's like there's no open windows for one. You know, like. You know, it's there were people who had it underground. There was, in Switzerland, 6 stories underground. Wow. And yeah, so these nature people would come along and be like, fuck this, you know, like literally in like a bunker, you know.
Let me say before I finish the Aquarian name story, just my being here is kind of a trip for me because having grown up fundamentalist Pentecostal, anybody that was remotely occult was a Satanist. So this is in the 80s, all right? I'm a youth group teenager in the 80s. We're burning rock albums because we're convinced that demons are associated.
Oh, which bands?
We were indiscriminate. We threw AC/DC in there, but we also had Kenny Loggins burning on that fire.
Huh.
That evil Satanist Kenny Loggins.
I know when Personal Jesus came out, there was the boys' Christian magazine my grandma had subscribed for me was pretty upset about the backside of that young lady, I think was the exact phrase.
Do you remember the occult scare from the 80s, though? I mean, I grew up in a really evangelical wing of Christianity. I don't know.
I do.
I think yours was a little bit more Protestant.
Well, this guy, my dad was, we were going, and talking shit about my silly Christian grandma.
Okay.
Meanwhile, I was going to church with my grandma and going, okay, grandma. But I was like, my dad, the way he taught me was that when we would do like the chakra work and we'd get up to this part,
right,
and we'd awaken the chest, we'd do all this love, love.
That's
love,
the heart
love.
center, right?
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Sacred Heart
but
of Christ.
then we'd go up to here, and then we'd go up to here, and then we'd go up to here. And his explanation is that, if the Christians do it right, they at least get up to here. And so whenever I'd go out with my grandma to church and we'd pray, I'd be like, and I'd have like this pink love light, and but I'd do it for Jesus, like with Jesus instead of Buddha in mind. And so from the very beginning, I was reconciling the two.
I read a quote today that kind of helped me reconcile some of that. It just simply said that those who are truly enlightened are no longer interested in judging those who aren't.
Right.
Because I can be.
No, because
I can be a little bit judgmental towards my counterparts back in Kentucky, who I still get in regular Facebook duels with on a pretty regular basis. The 80s scare in Kentucky, the 80s occult scare, we thought that Satanists were in every town, wearing black cloaks and waiting to come and steal our children at nighttime, rape them and kill them and eat them by a big bonfire in the woods while they went hopping about wearing antler horns.
Meanwhile, David J. was playing on that. No, actually, he was doing Love and Rockets by then. But like these goth kids in the 80s were like playing on that, and
right.
they were like the serious vampires.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
Of course, they were like the version who were like staying in their mom's basement, wishing that they had superpowers.
Well, it's interesting to think about because we remember before the internet. And that's a big deal. People are burned now. They will never know. I mean, they can think about it, but we're the last ones who are going to remember it.
This is like a punctuated leap in evolution.
Yeah.
We're like the hinge. We're the hinge generation.
We remember when people were like, do you think it's this? Do you think it is? There's no way to know. Let's put on the radio and see if they're talking about it right now on one of the stations. Really? I mean, or let's go to the library, like at 2 a.m.
I mean, the old dictum, as above, so beneath. Well, what if this is the so beneath manifestation of the
something that was going on above?
What is the occult word for that? At the Akashic record.
Right.
Yeah. What if the internet is the physical manifestation of that?
Oh yeah. Well, so's the brain, though. Oh, that's true.
Anyway, so back to my paranoia. So the fact that I'm coming here, I'm like looking over my shoulder, like, okay, is this the part where he's going to try to extract blood?
No. Yeah.
It's like and we have to wear like a cloak of some sort. So I go and I meet Jim at the Zorthian Ranch.
Mm-hmm. Oh, cool.
And
what a great place to meet Jim.
I just got a new job, so I was afraid to smoke out with him, but he invited me into his van to smoke out. I was like, go ahead. But we had the most engaging, intense conversation just sitting there in the van. And this kind of soul connection. And I introduced him to Phil later, and he did a few Kabbalah lectures at Phil's loft. Phil, the Apostle Phil, for lack of a better word.
Who I need to do research on because I used to know about. I think maybe he went to Greece. I think what it was is it was boring. Phil went to Greece and got himself killed. It was simple. I think it was a regular crucifixion.
No,
he
Phil,
did like
the ancient Phil.
No, yeah, the Apostle, because they all got killed except for John, right? Okay, let's see how much of a Bible nerd we are. All right.
John got boiled in water, didn't he?
No, John lived to a ripe old age and had
right.
Because he was there with Jesus.
No, they did boil
He
in
was
water,
the only one who
survived
went through it vicariously at the base of the cross. So he was spared having to go through some horrible torture.
Right.
Well, the rest of them were hiding, so it was sort of like, oh well, it's going to come later, guys. So Peter was crucified upside down in Rome, and then they buried him and they built the Vatican on it. because Jesus said, "I will build my church on you, and you'll be a rock that I'll build my church on."
So you think he's physically under the Vatican?
No, he is. Yeah, they've gone down there and said, "Oh, here it is."
I was
That's where
so
Peter is.
Pentecostal Protestant that we thought Catholic was the whore of Babylon.
Oh, they are.
But maybe in a good way.
No, yeah. Well,
Pope
whore in
Francis
the
is
sense
pretty
of selling
sweet.
out, and Babylon in the sense of the center of civilization. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but we all are. Like, I mean, in that metaphor, in the Revelation metaphor.
When I was trying to sort out what this meant, that I grew up in a Christian background, and I still consider myself a progressive Christian, but I was having all these fantastic experiences with people that are otherwise considered pagan, I really had to start digging. And it was around the same time that I had another synchronicity, when I found out that Carl Jung, who, on synchronicities, Carl Jung fucking triggered a lot of this. His red book was going on display at the Hammer. So I get out my whole crew together at our little commune, and we partake the sacred herb, get on the bus, and head out there. And I buy the copy. I buy the copy, take it home. And we started having these readings.
Colored?
Yes. I'll have you over sometime. We started having these regular readings of it.
That's great. Wow.
As I'm reading and kind of researching some of these archetypes and archons that he's working with, I realized there was this whole stream of Christianity, Gnosticism, and the Essenes, that they were having these experiences. They were having this version of, Christianity, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And the more I dug and read the Nag Hammadi texts and the Dead Sea Scrolls, Nag Hammadi texts, by the way, after they were discovered, they were put in Carl Jung's keeping. Probably the Catholic Church would have confiscated them. But I began to realize there was this whole ancient stream of Christian spirituality that I was so aligned with, and that was so much about all these things that I was experiencing.
Yeah.
That a lot of people would consider occultic. And the more I dug, I realized Jesus himself, I think historically, was an Essene. That the people of the Qumran community, the Dead Sea Scrolls, also there was a lay community that lived in Mount Carmel. I'm going to get really weird. Edgar Casey, the visionary from my home state of Kentucky, had this whole series of channelings and visions about the Essene community in Mount Carmel. And when you read the text, when you even read like Philo and I mean, evangelicals quote Josephus. And Josephus was saying the Essene community was John the Baptist community, and it was likely the community of Christ. There was introduced baptism. They had a vegetarian diet, nonviolence. For the most part, there was a pretty radical sect of them that was associated with the Zealots. But I just began to feel more. I found like a new home in this. This Gnostic Essene Christian tradition. And then I started having more conversations with Phil about that and realized that the Kabbalah that he was teaching was by and large from the Essenes. And the people predating the Essenes, the Pythagoreans. They were tapping into a similar thing, and all the things about light and sound being just a continuum of the same energy that composes the universe. And just going from a state of like fragmentation, like not knowing what these experiences mean and what my faith means, to all of a sudden having a coherent worldview again, felt so good. And the Source family was part of it. And in my dialogues with Jen, and I got the name when I was at the viewing of their movie over at the Cine family. And we all did a sacred herb ritual, where, you hold in for 6 seconds, and mind if I...
Sure.
And you hold in for 6 seconds, and I think Ahom, was that her name?
Oh.
Ahom?
Oh.
The
Venus.
Beautiful girl from the Source family?
Yeah.
Who's now like probably 80. But she is every bit as gorgeous as she was back then.
She was Mother Om.
No, not Ahom. She's the one who lives in Hawaii.
Oh, I don't know. Oh, you mean Isis?
No. And Isis almost stayed at our little communal house, actually, when she came for that.
Oh.
But I forget what happened. She ended up staying somewhere else.
Yeah, I don't know all the players, I have to admit. I'm much more interested in the spirit of the thing. But I love meeting the people. I love whenever I get to... I didn't know Enoch existed before he called me on the phone, and now he exists in my world. And so, I mean, if you're hearing this and I don't know who you are, don't feel bad. Just, give me a call if you want.
You may have to do some setup for the Source family just at the beginning of this for people that aren't familiar.
Oh, but, no, you haven't heard episode 7.
Oh, good.
We already set it up.
How exciting.
Yeah.
So there I'm at the viewing of this beautiful documentary about their cult family and just how they kind of created their own reality.
Right.
And just that beautiful thing that you can just create this environment, this reality that just throbs and has a life of its own, and people are drawn to that. And that's kind of what we were doing in our little community in Los Feliz, on a smaller scale. But I'd had a 6-second ritual with the sacred herb, and one of the original women of the Source family was playing this guitar and singing the most ethereal, gorgeous song I've ever heard. And I just sat there at her knees while she was singing, and she was looking at my eyes the entire time. And after having the herb ritual, her hair was just flowing, and she just kind of became this transcendent figure, almost like the Virgin of Guadalupe paintings. And it was hard to describe what happened, but I think Jen observed me just sitting there, kind of absorbed in her song when he thought of it. And I was helping him load some things out of the van, and he looked at me and said, "Can I give you a name?" And I was a little bit hesitant at first because I wasn't sure what all that entails. And still I have a whole segment of friends that kind of sees all this woo-woo shit, as they say, as being something that they find embarrassing or whatever. And here I have this whole other part of myself that I'm nurturing, and that's kind of taking over the rest of me.
Right.
I said, "Sure." He's like, "Yeah, I need your permission." I'm like, "All right." He's like, "Silence Aquarian." And at first, my first thought was, silence? That's kind of morbid or kind of inactive, inert.
Yeah, am I supposed to go over there and be quiet?
Yeah, no, I was like, does that mean I'm like, Silence the Aquarian? That could be like, the guy shuts everybody up, talks too much. Man, that might fit, actually. But, he said, no, that's from the primordial silence, prior to creation, that stillness with God.
Yeah.
Of the nameless God. That we only have access through manifestations that we can bear.
Yeah.
And yeah, that resonated. Because one of the things I really took, even from my Pentecostal upbringing, I never was initiated into like a cult ritual like yourself. But in a way, when I was 12, the same age Jesus was in the temple, I had this spiritual awakening myself and began to actually actively nurture this prayer life of praying an hour a day. And it was very evangelical, it was very Pentecostal. But like you said, it'll take you up to here.
Yeah.
And
that's the chest chakra.
The chest chakra, the Sacred Heart of Christ.
Manipura. No, the one above Manipura. Anahata.
And
I'm probably mispronouncing that. Anahat.
And I feel like Jen, when we were talking about this name, he kind of threaded together the beautiful parts of the tradition I grew up in with this higher version of that, which I was becoming. And, I don't think my wife even knows this. She's one of the people, frankly, that I don't know if I can really say a lot of this, because she kind of starts eye rolling and kind of almost getting spooked by it, or like, this is too much.
Well, there's a saying in the Golden Dawn, "The Lord of the universe, whom naught but silence can express."
Right on.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I honestly still don't know much about the Order of the Golden Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I still have all that, growing up in the youth group in the 80s, where if we heard something like the Golden Dawn, we just thought you guys were like Anton LaVey.
Yeah, but to be fair, you think the same thing about the other weird Protestant church across town.
You don't sacrifice cats on Halloween, do you?
No.
Please tell me don't. Okay.
No, but I mean, just as far as silence, I mean, the Golden Dawn is really, I mean, it's interesting and all, but I mean, like, silence is much more interesting, and you can find that in Kabbalah, which goes a little bit deeper. Like, okay, there's the circles. That Golden Dawn has Kabbalah in it, but Kabbalah isn't necessarily Golden Dawn. So, for example, okay, there was this guy named something real cool. He had a really groovy name. Athanasius Kircher. And in 1623, he was a Jesuit priest, Catholic priest.
Right.
And so, very scholarly
Pope
man.
Francis is a Jesuit?
So he took the Hebrew, the Sefer Yetzirah, read it, and he was like, well, I suppose that would look like this. And he drew that.
So the Tree of Life was drawn by a Jesuit?
Yes. It was originally drawn by a Jesuit.
So the Kabbalah, the Kabbalist prior that used these symbols without the illustration, without the visual depiction, is that?
The what?
So the Kabbalists before him?
Oh, yeah, they had rings like a tree.
Right.
They had Malkut in the middle, and then Keter on the outside. And we still have them in our textbooks, making fun of our ancestors for thinking that it was a geocentric world and that the stars were written on the inside of a sphere on the outside. But that's actually, if you look closely at those drawings, you'll find some Hebrew. The Reshit HaGilgalim, for instance, is on the inside of that sphere on the outside. Okay, there's the heavens of Isaiah, for instance. I mean, I don't know if I should go this direction. Should I? Because we're talking about the silence. The silence is what's always going on. Right. The silence is what was going on before the beginning. The silence is what's going on after the end. Whatever that means. The silence is what's always going on in the background, and it's always what's true. The vibration is going on certain levels, but only certain levels. Like if you key out, if you key into the infrared, there's some. If you key out, then there's none. But there's always the silence, and there's always the space in between everything, and there's always the Ein, which is Hebrew for there is no. Ein, for example, Bait Lohem, the place where Jesus was born, we know, house of bread, is what it means. So Bait is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Bet. Lohem is bread, so Ein Lohem is like, honey, Ein Lohem. Okay, I'll pick some up at the store. There's no bread. Ein Lohem.
Okay.
Ein means there is no. But in the spiritual sense, in the Kabbalah, this guy, before this is pre-Golden Dawn. This became Golden Dawn. And it includes Ein. But it doesn't contain it, you know? Ein is outside of it. Ein is beyond this. This is all just sort of play stuff. You know, like, the tarot, for instance. You know, sometimes you want to play, homeless. So you get ruin. You pull the ruin card and you're like, oh fuck, you know, I cheated on my wife and now she's got pictures and now the judge said, oh fuck, you know. So you play that card and then you die and you play the death card, right? It's a game. But the silence is what's real. That's what's going on in the background. That's what produces all of this. The Ein is the first veil of negative existence, and then that becomes Ein Sof, which is Ein limit, and there is no limit. So when you have
it's like the pregnant potential. It's more than an inert.
Yeah,
it's not an inert active.
It's the source of all.
It's
the ever-present source of everything that is.
Which can seem like an alarming void for somebody taking a nihilistic viewpoint of it.
Yeah, I mean, nihilism is sort of like, it presupposes a lot of things. It's like you're already playing the game and you're playing it in a certain way.
It's been said that God's presence is hell for those who aren't ready for it, you know.
God's presence, yes, I like that. My priest in the Catholic Church told me the same thing, and the way he explained it was very beautiful. He said that God's love is like a flaming fire. You know, it's like the Holy Spirit is fire, and when you embrace it, you feel it in your heart, and it flows through you, and you're one with all of it. And well, you know, having had spiritual experiences, by then I had leveled with him and said, look, there's this thing called the Golden Dawn, and I had totally fucking told him the whole story. Right. And so we were kind of speaking, you know, like person to person, and so he was saying, for the people who insist upon not being a part of that oneness, like in reality, in the truer sense, not necessarily in the symbols. Right. Someone could say, I reject the image of Jesus. I reject that particular language in which you're going to say his name. But I accept this oneness, which is actually what we really mean when we say Jesus. You know, so if you accept that, if you accept the actual, not the word, but the definition, if you accept what the symbol is supposed to be pointing to, it doesn't matter if you agree with the finger or the moon, as long as you're in tune with the sun that the moon is reflecting, that the finger is pointing at.
Right.
And that, like Enoch said, that finger in one case is Father Yod, and in another case it's Saint Peter, and in another case it's Siddhartha Gautama, and in another case it's Mohammed, and in another case it goes on and on and on. And there's all kinds of ways to get it wrong, you know, and to mistake the finger for the moon and then start chopping off people's fingers. There's one way to get it right, but everybody can do it. And you don't even need anybody else to tell you. You can do it on your own.
You know, this is going to sound unrelated, but it's totally related. I'll pull it together in a second.
Yeah.
But I've been thinking about the course of evolution and how these dyads are often playing off of one another. You know, you have two DNA strands, you know, linked together by how many crossbars, right? Spiraling upward. And that's a theme I've often had in my meditations and in some of my psychedelic meditations.
For sure, yeah.
Is this interplay of the spirals and how when you move up, if you move up in a counterclockwise motion, if you're looking at it from above, that's clockwise. And counterclockwise is clockwise for vice versa. And And there's this Hermetic, saying, of course, that's kind of the crux of a lot of ancient esoteric is as above, so beneath.
Right.
And I think in a way that all this occult, esoteric stuff bubbling up under the collective unconscious is directly related to how technology manifests on the surface.
Yeah.
There's an artist I like that often shows here in Highland Park, and every one of his paintings has the same somewhere in the painting. There is no nature, there's only technology. There is no technology, there's only nature.
Nice.
And even atheists kind of,
oh, yeah. Oh, then that's another
often have this duality
point. Yeah.
between humankind and nature kind.
Right.
And all the shit we build.
Or they can rock out of that. Yeah. Speaking of David J. Love and Rockets?
You cannot go against nature, because when you do, go against nature, it's part of nature too. Our little lives get complicated. It's a simple thing, simple as a flower, and that's a complicated thing. No new tale to tell, no new tale to tell, no new tale to tell. Oh.
Like I said, I grew up kind of in this really extreme mystical Pentecostal Southern church in Kentucky.
Uh-huh.
We were just one generation away from people that are handling snakes as an act of worship.
Wow.
Making up for the sins of their father, who was like this derelict moonshiner who used to hang people.
Great. Damn.
But that's a whole other story. But that whole weird collective narrative that I've been trying to work off in my own karma.
Yeah, I know how that goes. Yeah.
But this whole idea that when I was kind of moving away from that, it kind of became really hyper rationalistic. It really kind of got lost in my mind. And in a way, anything that was esoteric seemed like a waste of time during that period.
Oh, I can relate with that.
I look back on the hours I spent in prayer, and I'm like,
that
all
was
those
time
hours
wasted.
I spent in prayer reading theology,
Right.
I could have been becoming
Learning
more,
how to program.
more proficient, learning how to
Yeah,
program,
yeah.
becoming more proficient at guitar.
That's what I've been thinking. I could have been
Meeting
programmed.
girls,
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Well, I was
What's
able
that
to
for?
impress Janie,
And so I kind of moved away from
Harry
that.
Potter line,
There's somebody for everybody. But as I began to kind of re-engage this stuff, I mean, it was God or the universe pulling that out of me. I didn't initiate that; they initiated it.
Yeah.
It was like this involuntary initiation.
Yeah.
When the universe called you, and but when I began to experience this, I began to kind of make peace with it. No, those hours aren't wasted, even though those are different paradigms.
Yeah.
That
exactly.
I was planting seeds that are just blossoming into something else right now, and so it kind of
You
opened
can
me
use
back
it
up
now.
to that. I can spend time, doing this work that some people might consider indulgent in terms of my own meditation practice, my own research.
It's psychologically healthy, if nothing else. I mean, like there I don't know much about psychology, but I know my wife's stepfather's mother teaches mindfulness to children in inner city schools. And she uses these books called A Year of Living Mindfully and A Year of Living with More Compassion by Richard Fields, Ph.D. But there's a daily affirmations toward mindfulness, daily affirmations toward increase of compassion. And so these are concepts that, like just take out anything that seems religious and you're left with the essence of basically Buddhism and most of Christianity and, most of the essence of Christianity. Not everybody yelling on the radio necessarily, but
you mentioned the impact of yoga in pulling you out of your head and kind of reopening up to that's kind of what kickstarted my spirituality after this rationalistic period.
Right.
I was doing yoga at a gym, really secular, like this is for giving you tight abs yoga.
Yeah.
But because I'd been attuned from years of prayer and meditation in my other tradition,
right.
As soon as I went to corpse pose, I had a vision.
Yeah.
I had a vision that I was a child lost in the forest, and an old man took me by the hand and led me to his fire and said, "Here, take some food, stay warm by the fire." And eventually he led me out of the forest to a river, and there was a little boat, where the boat pilot like they guess used as ferry boats back in the old days across rivers, was coming to this side of the bank, and it was Jesus. And the old man lifted me up and said, "Here you go, I found your lost child." And I was sad to see this little man go. By the way, he's a little Indian man that had found me in the course. I was sad to see him go, but I was glad to reconnect with Jesus, and he was taking me across this river. And in a way, that was the first experience I had that broke me out of this rationality to help me re-engage my soul. And eventually that led to my own Vipassana practice and readings of Yogananda.
Yeah.
I mean, his commentary on the Gospel of John reopened me to Jesus.
Yeah.
And to what these deeper meanings of the Christ experience within the collective conscious.
There's a beautiful tradition in the Golden Dawn, I have to admit, that it's kind of like there's a stark contrast with when it gets ugly between people in the Golden Dawn. It gets so ugly, but when it gets beautiful, it gets so beautiful. Like when you can have a shared experience of such a very specific and focused energy, where you spend years working with final hay, and then you spend years working with Vav, and then you spend years working with the first hay, and then you spend years working with Yod. Then you start to invoke the Shin, and then it finally all comes together into Yeshua. And you've realized that all of these pagan paths you've walked over your course in the Golden Dawn, you were initiated into Egyptian mythos, you were initiated as a priest in the ancient tabernacle, as a Samothracian Kabiri, as in India, you got into Jainism with the Tatwas, you got into Arabic geomancy, you got into all this stuff, and it all finally came together into focus of the real meaning of what St. Paul talks about when he talks about the different parts of the body of Christ all operating together as the actual embodiment of what maybe we could call the cosmic Christ,
yes.
the cosmic consciousness. Because if the body of God is the universe, then yeah, I mean, like you could read St. Paul and say, yeah, we're all parts of the body of God. Yeah, we are.
Preach it, brother,
but then,
as
like
they say in the Southern Pentecostal Church.
Yeah. But then other times it's like,
Amen.
in a particular context, it's like, yeah, and you're not. But that's the part where it's like, okay, that's where you're stupid. Because in the Kabbalah, the Keter is one. Ararita is one. Tiferet is beauty and it's everything. So when you get into the Klipot, the evil anti-manifestation of the tree of life, Keter is no longer one, it's duality. It's the essence of duality, two contending forces. And then when you get into Tiferet, instead of beauty, it's the disputers. Not the debaters, not the constructive criticizers, not the let's have a conversation and share our ideas and get, different points of view, the disputers. The ones who, no, it's this. No, it's this. That's pride. That's the heart of God up against another heart of God, making each other miserable for no reason other than just the devil.
You described your order in a very in a way that makes sense with me growing up with the Christ narrative being very simple.
And then everybody gets to go be hypocrites and do all the things that the teachings tell you not to do.
Isn't that the case in the mainstream Christian church?
Yeah.
So initiation. I'm still trying to figure out what the use of initiation is. And I know that in the Indian tradition, that yogis, in a really deep tantric condition, you have to have a yogi.
I'm planning to do that at some point.
A guru. You have to have a guru.
Yeah.
And nobody really initiated me. Jen did maybe, but I didn't go through a ritual and march around candlesticks wearing a fancy robe.
Right.
But I don't know. I feel like in a weird way, maybe because I grew up Pentecostal, and even though it's conservative in some ways, it's a radically
It's incredibly magical.
Radically anarchistic movement that's very magical, very experiential.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny, when I kind of moved away from that, I got into punk rock, in the Burning Man community, which is all about collective orgiastic
Holy
experience.
Spirit. Yeah.
Similar to a room full of people speaking in tongues.
Yeah.
And just this wild frenzy.
Totally. Except better. Except doing it right. Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. In a way, part of being Pentecostal is almost being suspicious of initiatory experiences.
Well, it's a competition.
Or like
that's why Scientology doesn't like psychology, because it's competition. It's a different school of the same kind of thought. It's so Pentecostal cult isn't going to want you to get involved in a different kind of cult. They want you to call the Holy Spirit this way, not Not like they do over there, at the church across town, or especially not something that's, not even, let's say, Christian. Maybe.
So can you be initiated without form?
Initiated without form. Okay, well, that's interesting. Now, okay, there's like, blah, 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 too many, there's a lot of thoughts happening. Okay, so now I'm used to, because, like, what tends to be, there aren't a lot of people who speak with a whole lot of authority about what the traditional Golden Dawn practices are. I do it, but if anybody's out there listening to me, they're probably going, no. It's because that's the nature of traditional Golden Dawn.
So there's like Golden Dawn fundamentalists.
Yeah.
Like the purity follower
People
of
are very
Golden Dawn is
passionate.
out there somewhere in his mom's basement saying, you're doing it wrong.
But there might be some people that agree with me, but that doesn't mean they're right or that I'm right,
Why Golden Dawn?
Well, it's what I'm used to. That's
so
the
it's
thing.
your home tradition, just like Pentecostal.
Exactly. So when people have
right.
questions, that's usually what I'm talking about. So if someone were to ask me what's the use of Golden Dawn initiation, then basically I'm stumped. I'm left scrounging. I'm like, well, what's the use of playing D&D? Do you like it? Well, yeah. Well, then fucking get initiated. Shut up. But if you're talking about actual initiation, like real initiation, well, then that's a different question. I think that initiation happens when the DMT releases in your brain or in your mother's brain when you're 49 days old, as a zygote or before you're embryonic or whatever. I think that being born is surely an initiation. I think that cesarean babies miss out a little bit on that initiation, but they get a different initiation.
That resonated with me so much because my firstborn son, and I told you, the child is the father of the man. Me becoming a father was the most absolute transformative experience. My first child was born cesarean, and I had that distinct feeling that something in him was feeling that lack, that he didn't get to fully experience it.
Right.
And I think that
I wonder.
I mean, some psychologists even talk about birth trauma that gets kind of lodged in our subconscious.
But what if you don't get it? What if you just are in the womb and then one day they take you out and you're not? What a trip. Because, I mean, when I did my regression stuff, I got to a primal scream and a feeling of being like, and like in a tube. And
maybe for people like that, initiatory experiences are very helpful because it allows them to experience the completed journey.
That cathartic experience
the
they never
experience
got.
of completing the journey and being
I
initiated through that.
I wonder if they're like skydivers and hang gliders and, birdmen and, thrill seekers and, well, it'd be an interesting statistic to look into.
Yeah. It's
nice to meet a fellow second generation Aquarian. It's nice to meet a kindred spirit.
Yeah, I feel much more home in Eagle Rock. I really had a hard time leaving Las Vegas. There was that whole Aquarian energy.
Las Vegas?
That's not Las Vegas. Los Feliz.
Oh!
I had a hard time leaving Los Feliz because, the whole Aquarian energy.
The Oaks, isn't it? No, that's Los Robles. What's Los Feliz? What does that mean? Do you know?
The happy.
The happy. Los Feliz.
Well, I mean, that's where the father house
Feliz
was.
Navidad.
It's by the Hillhurst Central.
I think Z called that the mother house, the big brown one.
Like, I walked over there when I lived there.
Right.
But it looks different than it did then.
Yeah.
But, there's just that Aquarian energy, and I talked to Jen about, as soon as I moved here, I felt this, and this thing called out to me. You guys left a quantum footprint, a quantum shadow that's still there.
Yeah.
And so when I left Los Feliz and moved to Eagle Rock, I really missed that.
Yeah.
I kind of went through a bit of a depression, and then I was reading that everything in life moves through through periods of expansion and contraction, constantly expanding and contraction, just like your breath.
Yeah.
And I was definitely going through a major contraction period when I moved here, and it's great to see that Aquarian energy is here in the earth where I live too.
Yeah. I think that should be the next thing we should plan for is we should get in touch with Jin and see if we can get him on Skype, and then we can say, hey Jin, give us a class, or something. I don't know, or we could just all banter or something. We could all just talk and I think it'll be fun. Yeah.
How many Aquarians live currently here in Los Angeles that you know? They're in the
Oh, wow. I know of Z and his daughter and his wife. Wow, I don't know if I've met any other Aquarians around here.
I met Z randomly at Occupy.
Oh, cool.
I helped organize the May 1st General Strike.
Uh-huh.
And I was kind of carrying up the back of the march that was kind of taking me over downtown on May 1st. And he was standing on the sidewalk, and I recognized him immediately.
Nice.
I mean, just from the book, actually, or that's him. It's like, oh no, not Jen, sorry, Zarathustra.
Right.
And I recognized Zarathustra immediately. I mean, he just this big guy, just.
Yeah, I love Z.
He looked like the second coming of Father Yod, and it's
Yeah.
so funny that did you give him that?
I
name?
posted. Oh yeah, it's funny. Nobody's
Father Zed?
clicking like on that. I wonder if they think that I'm serious. I mean, not that I'm saying that he's replacing Father Yod, but in the context of the 10th commandment, everybody's supposed to replace Father Yod. That's the whole freaking point. It's like you don't just pick one part of the branching of a tree and say that's the father. You know, it happens every time that forks and branches.
That's another thing I've been thinking about, and why I'm probably a little bit resistant to authority figures doing initiations. In the 60s, that period towards the end of Pisces, they needed that.
Yeah.
They needed the guru. They
Yeah,
needed
to transition.
They needed the cult leader.
Yeah.
But in our generation, that doesn't work for us. Like, a guru just can't be convincing to the Generation
Right.
X and the millennials.
Right.
But I think that's part of the whole process of Father Yod becoming all of us becoming Father Yod.
Yeah.
That there's this exponential spreading of the Aquarian energy. As
Yeah.
we're shifting it
Well,
from
and if
Pisces to Aquarian.
If we shift our
Aquarius.
energy away from trying to convince the idiots at the coffee house that there's anything substantial to what we're into, and we shift it toward a healthier lifestyle and more yoga and more meditation and more practice and more reaching out to then it's sort of like they can either eventually go, well, all right, I guess, maybe I'll play a little, or not, I mean, there's plenty of space for people to insist that there's no magic if they want to. There's plenty of places for them to hang out and do that.
The word magic, that's another word that I had baggage with growing up.
Right.
In Pentecostal church, magic equals Satanism, of course.
Yeah.
And, sacrificing kids, we don't like that.
Right.
And even as somebody that's grown a lot warmer to the richness and depth of occult symbols, and these orders like the Rosicrucian movement, which I kind of resonated a lot with during this transitional period.
Yeah.
Even though I never sought it out and got initiated because of my not liking the authority.
Right.
But our generation, the Generation X,
Oh,
and
right.
millennials,
Yeah.
they can't find a convincing guru.
Yeah.
But it's because we've internalized it. And that's the nature of paradigm shifts. Even Thomas Kuhn talks about that
Yeah.
in his Sociology of Science, that when a paradigm shift happens, the paradigm shift that's happening subsumes the previous paradigms, and that's why it's a successful paradigm. Because it subsumes it and reorders it in a more coherent fashion.
Well, here's a couple of thoughts. Just about words. And one of the names of Thoth, words from silence.
Okay.
Okay, what am I
Thoth,
talking
words
about?
from
So
silence.
Thoth, words from silence.
Which-
Words.
Okay.
Words like cult. The cults of Isis, back in the day, that became early Christianity. They were a group of people who shared a common belief and practice. And they called them cults. And that's basically what the word has always meant. Up until you have your Jimmy Jones, Gannon says I should say Jim Jones, because Jimmy sounds like a
fucking Jim
buddy.
Jones killed
But,
the 60s, didn't he?
Yeah, and Charles Manson and
Right.
the bad cults. And so then now the word cult has a bad connotation. Now guru is a Sanskrit word. Gu meaning confusion and ru meaning clarity. So the one who makes the confusion clear, the one who clarifies what you're confused about.
I have a very dark question. This is something I struggle with. Does every Woodstock demand that there's also an Altamont?
No, I don't think
See,
so. I see what you mean.
I mean, there's these polarities that civilization kind of
If
inevitably
with the
expands
internet,
and contracts with.
if we had internet, then Mick Jagger would have known that it was the Oakland Hells Angels that are cool, not the fucking Los Angeles Hells
Hey,
Angels.
man, yeah. Seriously.
So these days, no, you don't need to have an alt mod because there's no excuse for ignorance.
Oh, so that led me to my fear of authority saying, because when I was a kid, I saw prophecy abused. Self-proclaimed prophets, the old lady in church is saying, God's telling me to tell you not to date that girl. She's bad news. And you're like, okay, God said that, so I guess I have to listen. And so I saw people becoming very authoritarian with their
Right,
prophecies
yeah.
and words of knowledge in the Pentecostal church.
Yeah.
So even though I'm more open to the idea of magic, I'm still apprehensive about it because I'm like,
Well,
is
that
this
goes
people-
on.
Is this people manipulating each
Yeah.
other and saying,
Yeah.
"Oh, the universe wants us to sleep
Sometimes
together"?
it
you
is,
know,
yeah.
Or you're supposed to do this or that. you
That
know?
does go on, yeah. So it's good to be wary of that.
And what does magic even mean from your tradition? Like
Well-
in my tradition, we believe in miracles. We say
Right.
miracles.
Yeah.
These are out of the ordinary experiences.
Yeah.
But we would never use the word magic because magic feels like you're manipulating something. Like
It's
instead
true.
of allowing God to change,
It's true.
instead of allowing God to change you, you're trying to change God, which from my tradition,
Yeah.
that's where you're going to get screwed up.
Well, okay. Strictly speaking, if I'm really going to nerd out, the energy, in one sense, flows down the pillar of mercy, the white pillar, right?
Right.
And then it flows back up the severe pillar, which is why it's severe, because
Altamont Woodstock.
a bug doesn't want to get squished and end up going back to heaven. So the magician is the one who's about to get reabsorbed into Keter, and he's reconciling light and darkness. And so he's got one hand jacked into Keter, and one hand that out of which is being manifested everything in the universe and everything in all of creation. So it's not that he is doing it, it's that God is doing it through him. It's that there's like, for example, this here is the place where it's called the perfect path, Hod, and it's the place where the ability to conceive of the totality of everything happens. And so you ask, you mean for people or for God? Yes. It's where that happens. So,
Say the
so
statement
God,
about totality again.
okay, so in Hod, you can look at the whole tree of life and go, oh, that's where God does that. That's
Right.
where we do that.
See, here's the problem I have. The only time I ever really got thrown into the wall on a psychedelic meditation was when I was reading Carl Jung's Red Book, and there's the picture of the tree, the gorgeous tree with the roots going under the ground, and the dragon down here, and emanations from heaven up here. And I was reading about the Gnostic concept of the plemra, the all, which is close to the silence. Are you familiar with the term the plemra?
Not very much.
It's the everything. It's like the Tao, which
Right.
contains the light and the dark forces. But for some reason during that meditation, I felt like and this could be my evangelical baggage, but I felt like I'd been like over demanding upon the experience, and I wanted to experience the plemra, all of this, the above
Yeah.
and the below,
Yeah.
the dirt and the rot that the tree grows from too, and I got thrown into the wall. It was a horrifying experience, and I feel like when I hear people in these orders talking about becoming Christ, or even the Greek Orthodox tradition, which is my great grandparents were from. They talk about there's a word
Emulating
for,
Christ.
Well, there's a word for actually becoming unified with Christ.
Oh,
That's a little bit closer to the Eastern tradition.
theosis.
Theosis, right?
Yeah.
But even though I was aware of that, I still have trouble with ever wanting to take on too much because I feel like that's where a person opens themselves up to the demonic, as it were.
Right.
And it's that classic
Oh, yeah.
Greek mythology thing of I can handle that fire,
Yeah.
and I guess I want to always be aware and accepting of my own limitations, and know that this is where I'm supposed to be,
Yeah.
and this is grounding, staying grounded. Whereas trying to step above that when I wasn't ready,
Yeah.
that just opening myself up for spiritual bombardment.
I think being an eternal student helps. There's this one particular sutra that I like from the Suryangama Sutra, Volume 8. Buddha is talking to Ananda and tells him that when you meditate for a long enough, he starts giving him examples of things that are going to start to happen. Like you're going to realize that you're one of the millions of Buddhas throughout all the ages who have been and will come, and here you are now, and you're all together meditating, and there's one great Om, and it's the sound of the universe, and it's going to be a really good stage. And as long as you don't think you're a sage, then you'll pass through it, and it'll be fine. But if you think you're a sage at this point, you'll be vulnerable to the demon's influence. Next. And then he says, next, this will happen. you'll realize
Is this
that
the Tibetan Book of the Dead?
no, this is Suryangama Sutra.
Okay.
And so he says next you'll realize that every time you take a step, you're killing life, and that life devours life, and you'll start to weep and weep, and it'll be a good stage, and you'll get through it just fine. But if you think you're a sage at this point, you'll be vulnerable to the demon's influence.
And that's what they use. You'll be vulnerable to demons?
Yeah, you'll be vulnerable to the demon's, plural, influence.
That resonates. Just keep going.
Yeah, I mean, it just basically, it goes on and on like that about all the different really profound levels of spiritual awakening you're going to experience as you go along your path. But if at some point in your path you turn around and say, okay, I have now arrived and I'm ready to start taking disciples, that's when the demons have taken over.
I think this is where this comes down to brass tacks in some ways. Me growing up Pentecostal, talking to you, an occultist, is, and this might resonate even with some of the listeners if they come from a similar background, is that we saw there being two forces in the universe, the force of God and the force of the devil.
Mm.
And fortune tellers, occultists, if they were getting stuff and it wasn't from our version of God,
Right.
Well, now I realize these people who say they're their version of God,
Well, you heard
that's the smallest possible emanation. In fact, nowadays I consider that the traditional Gnostic demigod.
The demiurge.
The demiurge,
Yeah,
the lesser emanation that's all about aggression and possessiveness.
Jealousness.
Jealousy,
the jealous god.
But anyway, there's still that baggage, though, of the demonic, and what does that mean?
Right, yeah.
And like, I even had a client walk into, I work as a psychologist at the clinic, and the first thing he said, which triggered my own paranoia, was, my dad was a something Mason higher order. He was all into that shit. Opened me up to demons.
Mm.
And I mean, by all,
his mom clearly told him that his dad opened him up to demons.
that's definitely
He
hypothesis.
didn't mention the mom, but
that's definitely a hypothesis I came up with.
Yeah.
But my first gut was just like, oh, all that baggage.
Grandma,
from,
maybe. Yeah.
Oh my God, this stuff is demonic. This stuff is dangerous. Until I understood what symbols really do,
right,
and what these things really mean, and the interplay of the collective unconscious with the individual consciousness.
People of the Lie by Scott Peck is a very interesting book, and especially he was in your line of work.
Right.
He asks the question, what is human evil? It's not a psychological question usually. It's they'll say, well, malignant narcissism. They'll use mal, which is Latin for evil, but in the word ignorant, malignant narcissism.
That's great. We use the Latin word for evil.
Yeah, but they're not the English word. And so he's asking, using the English word, and he's also a Christian mystic a bit. And so he's talking from that standpoint, and he's witnessed exorcisms, and so he's analyzing the exorcism as a psychologist who's into Christian mysticism. So it's interesting. Scott Peck, M.D. I think he passed away.
So how do you guys see demons? And how do you see magic?
How does Golden Dawn?
Like in Pentecostal circles, everything's about angels and demons fighting.
Well, you have
it's
to
about
understand
prayer
my
and miracles,
role. My role for many years was to speak as the voice of the tradition of Golden Dawn.
Yeah.
And so whenever anybody would ask me a question, I'd say I have to answer that twice. I'll answer first as the premonstrator, and then I'll answer as BT. And they were never the same answer. So when you say, what do you guys think? I can give you one answer that nobody thinks.
I mean, do you guys do miracles? Do you guys heal people? Do you...
Yeah. But, that's kind of like the sad part. That's the part where they get you. That's where the cult leader says, yeah, but if you leave, then how will the 6 of us heal people of AIDS like we did that guy, And so then you start to feel all kinds of guilt, like, God wants you to stay here at the table with us, giving us 10% of your income. So it's creepy and weird, and so you start to, it starts to help, embracing, reincarnation rather than this urgency to go around healing bodies and stuff like that. And I had a teacher named Gordon who was... he would always say, "Oh, stop with your healing meat bodies. Get out of your..." He was a trained Scientologist as well as being a trained Zen practitioner under Suzuki back in the 60s. And so that's where I got a lot of that background. My dad and my mom were both trained in M.E.S.T, Earhart's seminars training, and he was trained by Scientology. So I got Scientology from directly and indirectly
that's a
in
very
my training.
The larger branch of Gnosticism does see the whole meat body thing and get out of this meat body and don't get caught up in it. But there was a whole other branch called the Therapeutae, an Alexandrian branch that was much more about using psychedelic substances and using healing agents to heal the physical body as well, which to me resonates with as above, so beneath.
Right.
And
biblically, that would be pharmakia, which is forbidden, though. But biblically, you were talking about one kind of magic versus another kind of magic. There's the sorcerer, the evil sorcerer, who does divination and throws bones to find out the future to make money.
For us, magic means spells that make stuff happen.
Right.
And
where the other one is the prophet of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, who's in the name of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh doing a divination to find out what God wants for us, that kind of thing. That's different.
Which in mainstream Christianity is
that's fine.
A normal pastoral role.
Well, at least in the Bible it was. Maybe
Right.
they wouldn't encourage their parishioners to go out and throw bones, but it was okay in that one instance where the guy did it, and it was for whoever.
Well,
but
in the book of Judges, God told people to do some weird shit.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. There was some eating of some feces, if I recall correctly. But
of course, I also see that God is Yahweh a lot.
Johannes Trithemius was the teacher of Henry Agrippa. Henry Agrippa was famous for bringing occultism to the world. His teacher was the father of the Benedictine order. You were surprised that this came from a Jesuit.
Right.
And
were these the Rosicrucian order was within the Jesuit order, right?
The Rosicrucian order is hard to pin down, but these are real people. Okay. For example, the Christian Rosencreutz, the mythological Christian Rosencreutz, he's hard to pin down. Maybe he's based on real people, maybe not. But Johannes Trithemius actually did get raised in a cloister, and he was from a noble German family but was poor and learned Greek and Latin at a young age, and then he traveled and met a mysterious stranger, and then he didn't travel to Damascus and get the name CRC. He came back to wherever the fuck city it was, and he became a monk in the Benedictine order, which already existed, but then he, within a year, became the abbot at the age of 21, and then he turned that into the largest library in Germania at the time, and it was basically a cultural heart of Northern Europe. And he was the teacher of Henry Agrippa, and he had a little secret chamber in the back, and when he was accused by the Catholic Church of being a black magician, he said, "I practice no other magic than the magic of the love of Christ."
I love that. I want that quote on my wall.
Yeah.
So there we are. The term
Look
magic...
up Johannes Trithemius.
The term magic is a real hang-up.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really want to bring the best good of this, I wonder...
But he did practice the magic of the love of Christ, though. He wrote down all the angelic correspondences we use in the Golden Dawn. That's what he was doing.
So if you're seeking to make converts, I mean, once again, I'm speaking from evangelical baggage.
Right.
They get all excited and says, we should get everybody learning this.
Yeah, I know. I've been there. Yeah.
But if you were trying to translate your experience to somebody from my neck of the woods back in Kentucky, Uncle Jim from Possum Trot, it's a real town. How you would probably have to replace the word magic with a different word.
Probably.
What would you call it if you didn't call it magic?
Well, shit. I mean, who am I talking to? This is someone who
Uncle Jim from Possum
who
Trot.
actually does the snake thing,
he doesn't do the snake thing, but he has another cousin who does.
Right.
They do everything else. They speak in tongues. They go into spasmic fits and go running around the church. And this is interesting. I used to see people go into these complete frenzies and throw themselves from the platform and run a full sprint around a church full of people. Half the people that were on the ground because a common experience was getting slain in the spirit, where the preacher would come over and be like, "Receive the Holy Spirit," and then the person would fall down. And so it's like a Civil War battlefield. There's bodies all over the floor in front of the church.
I guess the answer is you don't.
I've seen people run with their eyes closed, leaping over the people on the floor and dodging things with their eyes closed. In these states of Holy Spirit fullness.
I think that, when you're in LA, sometimes it becomes a question, well, why is secrecy relevant anymore? But if you're in a place like that, yeah, it is. Maybe you don't want to say magic to them.
Right.
I mean, if you're talking about building a worldwide community, wait a generation or two. Some people don't want it. Some people are going to resist it. So you can't force it on people. You got to give people their space to be different and resist.
I think in a way that I've come to see. I have my evangelical baggage, but I've come to see a lot of this as something that doesn't even have to be spread consciously or directly.
Because it just
it's already
spreads.
there. It's going to happen. It's doing it.
Yeah.
And we're just the part of it that's realizing it right now. And I really do believe that the meat body technology, the computer we're recording this on, I believe it's all part of it.
Yeah.
I don't see that as separate from the spirit. I see on a very quantum level that every atom that makes up that monitor is spirit on some fundamental level.
Yeah.
and that as we continue to grow in our consciousness, that'll manifest in physical forms in terms of new technology. I mean, call me an optimist, but that's how I see the world evolving.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's all part of it. I mean, I think that one thing that is rough for people from a Christian background is we, get taught God is light and in him there is no darkness at all. And that kind of contradicts some of the other things, like, for example, in the Golden Dawn, we say, Lord of light and the darkness. You are Lord over the light and the darkness. Like the neocortex is the Lord over the hypothalamus and the amygdala, or something, But to say, oh, God is only good and Satan is evil. Evil only exists in Satan. But if you ask a Jewish Kabbalist, they have a different tree of life designed by a guy named
do you have a picture?
Luria. I don't actually,
Okay.
but they would call this the sphere of evil, the sphere of Geburah, the sphere of evil,
What
and the
number
sphere
is
of.
that?
This is number 5.
Okay.
Then this is number 4. Number 4 would be good. Number 5 would be evil. Now, in Golden Dawn, we wouldn't call it that, because for us, evil's below Malkuth.
Well, Woodstock's on the right, Altamont's on the left.
Yeah. But I mean, you need them both. But I mean, there's so many ways to look at the Tree of Life, and that's the beauty of it, is like, don't get locked into one way to look at the Tree of Life, because there's so many ways. Like those names they put on Boda, I mean, just thinking about those as a kid, I'm thinking about memory and will. Memory and will. So the blue one is memory, and the red one is will. And so then thinking about that later, okay, well, maybe Tiferet in the middle, maybe that's present time, and then the blue one is the past, and then the red one is the future. So you need memory in order to have will. So, like, in the beginning, I am. Okay, great. And then, a billion years later, I still am. Great. But then you have memory. And then, I was. What am I going to do next? That's the first time that question comes up. You don't have the future until you have the past. And the past doesn't exist. The past is just a trick with mirrors in the present. But once you have it, then you have will. Then you can move down the tree of life.
That's a beautiful depiction of the I Am as he reveals himself to Moses.
Yeah,
the
and the
I Am.
flaming sword, yeah. And then, because then you have, then the funny thing, funny, it's a really transcendental use of the word funny, is then you have Tiferet, you have the beauty, it's like this whole hexagram has come together, and everything makes perfect sense. But then you dip below that, into the waters below the firmament, on the, the firmament between the ripples of water of Aquarius, and then you get into the astral waters, and you're separate from God, and then there's two of you, and one of you has tits, and the other one has a peepee, and it's like, oh my God, and so you have Venus, so then you have desire.
So is that the male-female characters at the base of a lot of the occult art that I see?
Yeah.
And then there's eventually this hermaphrodite
Yeah.
character.
Well, I'm just using the example in this example. I mean, because you can kind of go, you can travel wherever you want to in Kabbalistic correspondences, but in this particular usage of what I'm talking about is when you separate from God, you want to be united with God. When you're one with God, you're one with God. So one who's one with God, like all the initiations to make you Osiris, make you Jesus, make you the oneness, the theosis, the gnosis, whatever, you center yourself in the heart of the tree of life. But when you want that, when you're wanting it, you're here. You gotta keep wanting it. So someone who thinks, oh, I've arrived, I don't need to want it anymore, is actually just sinking back down here. But if you keep wanting it, then you keep rising. And this is reason over here. So you can get stuck in reason. You got to break down the tower to get out of reason and get into desire.
And that's what yoga did for me. I don't
Yeah.
know what it's like for you, but I
Yeah.
was so stuck in my head in grad school.
Mm-hmm.
Yoga pulled me out of my head and back into my body.
Nice.
My world is your world. People like to hear their names. I'm no exception. Please call my name. Call my name. Silencio.
Special thanks to David J. Haskins and all of Love and Rockets. Special thanks to Neil and Frater CCP, the Esoterinerd's first 2 patrons. This is, after all, listener-sponsored radio. Special thanks to the monks at Mount Koyasan, to Jin Aquarian for giving Silence and I something in common to bring us together to have this conversation tonight. And always special thanks to you who took the time to listen to this episode. Episode 16 will be coming out very shortly. The interview is already in the can. It is with Hart Williams, who worked with Andrew Vipassana probably longer than any other living person. It'll be the first of, hopefully, several interviews with Hart. Also around the corner, this Thursday at 1 p.m., I'll be interviewing Very Honored Frater Yod Shin Yod and Very Honored Sorer M.D.S. of Thuban Temple, #1 Hermetic Society of the Golden Dawn in Canada, #1 Unified Order of the Golden Dawn in the Americas. Frater Yod Shin Yod is also the author of Adept Magic, so we're looking forward to that. Isis Aquarian will be on here, and Mark Williams. He and I have the same tattoo and filthy sense of humor. That should be fun. Have a good night, everyone. To the north and to the south, to the east and to the west, to the spirits of light among us, and to the spirits below, we send out our reverent love and compassion. May all beings be happy. May all beings be serene. May all beings be in peace. Oh.